There's a lot of text that we add to the maps, whether as labels or map elements, so let's talk about that here in part 3. And once again, fleshing out some key terms. And so characteristics of type. First off, we have type family. And I have examples of them, Palatino, Times, Verdana, in which I have put those particular types of text into a particular family. And these are families that are grouped. A type of style is when you have it regular, or you bold it, italicize it, or then bold italicize it. And so when we think about a particular font, as we use that term typically, that's typeface, which is a combination of both type family and type style. So we think of, let's say, Times in bold, that is a particular typeface. So to help out with terminology. Type size is the height of a typeface, generally measured in points. And so I have examples of 36 point, 24 point, 12 point. And where does this all come from? 1 inch is equal to 72 points. So a 10-point font is essentially 10 divided by 72 inches. In terms of case, there's the uppercase where we have all caps. This is the best for the most prominent, often largest land feature. Could be an ocean, river, where essentially is the largest thing on your map. Typically we use the uppercase. Lowercase, rarely used, too informal. Title case, that's when the first letter of each word is capitalized. That's probably the most often used, especially when we have place names on a map. Titles on a map often use this particular format. And then, of course, sentence case, and that's something for, maybe a description of the map, a description of the data, in which, of course, you then flesh out and use a full sentence. Next up are serifs and sans serifs, or without serifs. And so here, these are the short extensions, and so I'm pointing to them here, the short extensions at the end of these particular letters. Those are called serifs. So the purpose of those, they help for, especially when you're reading on printed documents. This helps the reader kind of goes flow as you read. These little extensions kind of help with the flow of that. And so it's really more useful for published documents in which you actually physically are looking at. Sans serif is of course shown here without the serif. And we're seeing more and more of these in digital displays, electronic displays. It definitely has space-saving abilities in terms of it's more efficient, doesn't take up as much space. Fortunately or unfortunately, it does not make much difference in cartography. There is situations where maybe you could use a title, could be in serif, and then the rest of the information could be sans serif, so you can mix and match. Perhaps maybe the most prominent, the largest feature, a country name, perhaps might be, you could put in serif, and then have the rest of the information sans serif. But for the most part, we like to keep things consistent. So where you use a particular type, serif in one particular area of the map, you want to then use it in another area of the map. Letter spacing, as you would think, is the spacing between individual letters. And so I did that here. So what the first here is a normal. Then I said, okay, I want you to expand this 1 point. So expanded it 1 point. And then here I said, okay, I want you to condense that original normal regular sentence here, condense it 1 point. So essentially what this is all about is saving space or filling space. And so this is one of the things is as you start making maps, as you start getting to post-production and adding labels and letters and text and titles and all of that good stuff, you'll want to make everything look nice and fill out space or not take up too much space. And so when we think about typography, not topography, we're really concerned about making sure everything is aligned correctly, centered, aesthetically pleasing. We don't like having things mixed and matched, having different styles. We want things filling space, but not overflowing space. Next up is word spacing, of course. That's the spacing between words. And so here, we think about when we have text that's normal and then italics. See how the italics, the S is closer to the B, and how the D looks like it's separated farther from the I than it otherwise would be if this wasn't italicized. And so when we think about word spacing, this is what we have to consider. And so when we have a big title and we put things maybe in italics, it's going to really be noticeable. And so we want to think about word spacing, especially when we have that text really stands out and it's really something which the map viewer is going to be looking at. And once again, we have the nice situation where a lot of advanced programs help us out with this. And so you see a lot of Microsoft Word, they do a lot of working with word spacing to make things more efficient, trying to fit all the words in there so that we have a nice flow in which things don't look squished, things don't look all separated, but everything is in balance, everything is proper. Next up is leading, pronounced like heading. Essentially, it's the vertical space between lines. And so this is a little bit more complicated to do between the previous ones, word and letter. And if you've done a big document, a big report, this is stuff you've already related to. You can relate to this, in which you write a big, huge amount of text. You insert an image, huge amount of text. It ends up having situations where you might have a couple sentences go off onto another page, and then maybe you add another sentence, and essentially what it does is then it throws everything off. Now that photo that you had nice and centered is off on the next page, everything gets screwed up, and so you play with the line spacing, trying to get everything to fit so it looks nice in a report. Same idea applies to the text that we put on a map. And so leading, the line spacing, when we think about a legend, we have our symbols next to the particular text, and we have, let's say 7 different symbols, 7 different data classifications for a choropleth map. We want the leading for every single one of those particular texts with the symbols next to it to be identical, to be the same. Now we might want to expand it. We might want to increase the spacing, but we want it to be the same no matter what. Keeps the consistency. So whereas in another feature class that might be included in a column next to it on the legend, maybe it only has 4 different classes, 4 different things. Well, then that would make sense that we would want to expand the line spacing even more for balance, so that they take up relatively the same amount of space within the legend. And here's a leading example, and of course here where the line spacing has increased. And you've done this before. I know students when they turn in, this is the old days, back when we used to print out documents, back when we used to have, it has to be five pages, or else. And then students would do this. They would then make the font. They would, make the typeface, try to make it a little bigger size, but then they'd also would play with the spacing in between to make things stretch out and take up more space. Same idea here. So we want to have a particular text box within a map, and we want to really make it fill out. We don't want to have a situation where we have extra space. Then we would want to do this. We'd want to increase the leading, increase the line spacing. Another way to, let's say, save space is something called kerning. And so here we see a great example of this. And so here's where A and V, where we have no kerning. And so what we can do is we can essentially move the V over, and essentially we just save space. And so here is when kerning is generally negative in terms of it decreases the space in between letters, but once again helps condense things. And so maybe we have a situation where we want to squeeze a lot of text in a small amount of space. This is something we can do. We can apply kerning to it to help with that. Even further, something that the book doesn't mention called ligatures. And so these can also help to kind of squish things, condense things. And so here, F and I condense them. F and L condense them. And so this is actually something when you're reading it, you really don't see that. You don't really see that they're essentially merged together. If we have a big, huge, like magnification, you would see you wouldn't even notice that these are essentially squished together. And so once again, a way to save space. And if you're using other languages, German, Chinese, Hindi, I guess that'd be Mandarin. These are all different types of languages that use ligatures, and so that's why it's also then thus built into the GIS. And so ArcGIS. And so what I show here is different ways in which you can then, in the particular label class pane over here, adjust the formatting, adjust the word spacing, the letter spacing, the line spacing, ligatures. You can apply it, kerning, or not. You can check them on or off. And so just, the reason why I'm going to show this is kind of how and where you do it in ArcGIS. Finally, I got a lot of text here, but let's talk about some general typographic guidelines. And so I suggest avoiding decorative type families. I mentioned this beforehand. Students go crazy when they see that they can do all these crazy things, all these different fonts. Just make it simple. Oftentimes, these are difficult to read. Just imagine like my 5-year-old could never read that. They have no idea what that says. And so just think about your audience. Think about if it's a general public, you want to keep things simple. Further, I suggest avoid using too many type families. So in terms of font type, 2 to 3 is pretty good. I wouldn't go any more than that. And even further, the title, if subtitle is included, legend, scale, data source, date, credits, they should all be the same. Same font type in terms of the family. And once again, thinking about your audience, you got to think that, although you might have great eyesight, you eat all those carrots, great, good on you. But maybe another person can't really see as well. They have to take off their glasses and get super close to the document to read it. We don't need that. That's not good cartography. So we want to maybe have a larger font size. And so 7-point is usually the minimum. Speaking of font size, type size should correspond with the relevance or the size of the feature. And I show examples of this right here. And so as always, got to use good judgment. And so here's how we can use text to show differences. And I've already kind of showed this earlier in the video, but just once again connecting it back to our topic right now, typography. And so categorical difference, so showing qualitative difference. You can use font types. You can use italicized or bold, and you can use hue. And so essentially this is showing value. Indiana is bigger than Indianapolis, which is bigger than Marion County. Or you could essentially say Indiana is a state, which is different than Indianapolis, a city, which is different than Marion County, a county. Further, using size, you can use the font size, the weight, the lightness. So here I did that to show value. Indianapolis is a bigger font on the map because it's bigger than the downtown, which is bigger than the IUPUI campus. And similarly, we can do that with bolding and italicizing. Bolding obviously stands out more. And we can also do it with font in terms of lightness, going from the darker to lighter. And rarely, if ever, should you use underline for text on a map. Finally, my last two things: do not accept the defaults of the map program you're using, especially ArcGIS. And it's my opinion that the best maps that I see are the ones that look like they weren't made in ArcGIS. Finally, spell check your map. This is not most ArcGIS, most GIS programs, they don't have that for you. And so there's nothing worse than getting a fantastic map that has a spelling error or something in which it's just glaring, in which they spell Indiana without a D,